Whether it's finding more explosive plays out of the ground game or getting a third wide receiver to go along with KeAndre Lambert-Smith and Trey Wallace, Penn State's got to improve that offensively or they're not going to beat Ohio State and Michigan.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That is right. You are Locked On Nittany Lions. Thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I am your host, Zach Seyko, and I am joined by, he covers football for Penn State's Com Radio. He also does a great job with men's basketball. And given the schedule release, we're talking about that. He just recently came back from Champaign. He was at the Illinois game in person. So, Adam, we got plenty to discuss here on an important episode. Before we get to any of it, today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnCollege and enter promo code LockedOnCollege for a free white tech hat with any purchase. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you. Adam, coming back from Champaign, so you saw this in person, 30-13. There were plenty of things to take away, and I encourage people to go check out the last episode of Locked On Nittany Lions, where we talked about things that we learned about the offense. But the ground game's got to get fixed. The wide receivers, somebody's got to step up outside of KeAndre Lambert-Smith and Trey Wallace, Adam. And then the tight ends. Like, I'm tired of the tight ends being used as extra blockers. Theo Johnson is a receiving threat. Tyler Warren has some of the best hands on the team and is called the quote-unquote best kept secret by CBS Sports. Josh Pate, to be specific there. Love his show. But, Adam, they're being used as extra blockers. I feel like this could double up as, we just need another pass catcher to step up for the Nittany Lions here. But if you had to prioritize any of that, would it be getting more explosive plays, a better inside ground game from the running backs, from the ground game just in general, get the wide receivers a little more involved or somebody to step up, or the tight ends? How would you rank this in terms of priorities? I'd say the ground game, right? Because your ground game is always going to help you succeed, whether you're at home, you're on the road, the weather conditions are perfect. They're not ideal. I feel like you got to start with running the rock, but what do you say?
I agree with you. I think it definitely starts with running the football. I think that's been Penn State's biggest problem so far this year. You got two running backs that are considered one of the best duos in the country with Kaytron Allen and Nicholas Singleton. They just haven't been able to break anything down the field yet. They haven't been real explosive. I believe still the longest running play on the team is still by Trey Potts back in the Delaware game in garbage time. So, they just have not been able to get explosive runs. And I think when you look at what they have with those two guys who are explosive, you got to find a way to get them into the second level. I think they did a good job extending the run game with some passes of Nicholas Singleton, get him out in space against Illinois. I thought that was a good addition. But I think when you get that running game going, especially in between the tackles, that's really going to open a lot of the other problems up. It's going to get their tight ends more open when they're kind of getting out off their blocks and getting open out in the flats. You're going to get your second or third receiver open as well. So I think it all starts with the running game. You get those two guys. You have an offensive line that James Franklin's really happy about. Maybe he hasn't performed to the level maybe he was expecting going into the season, but definitely an opportunity this week against Iowa where they're going to want to run the ball at home, maybe get some explosive runs and open everything up. I think that's going to be the key for Penn State going forward. They got to find a way to get explosive runs from their two star backs.
I think that is key there. First, it's all the talent in the world, right? Nicholas Singleton and Kaytron Allen are future first-round picks. I see Singleton as a top 10 pick, one of the first running backs taken in both in their respective draft, because they're only going to be in Penn State for 3 seasons. Then Kaytron Allen is going to be probably a top 25, at least a first-round pick. I could see him being selected maybe 28th, 29th, 30th by a playoff team that's, fresh off of a playoff season that comes in and needs a new starting running. Both of those guys are day one starters in the NFL when their college careers are finished up. But so that's the talent that Penn State has, right? I want to put that into perspective for people. Is it the wide? Because people have said, and I agree, and you start to notice it when you really pay attention to it. The wide receivers are just not doing enough with their blocks. I saw Dante Cephas in the game against Illinois. That was just a one-off example, but over the course of West Virginia, Delaware, KeAndre Lambert-Smith hasn't been doing well with his blocking. Trey Wallace, basically anybody that's been on the football field for Penn State at the wide receiver spot, and which is why the tight ends have been in to block more often. But I've also been disappointed with the inside zone game. Penn State has had more success running outside of the tackles. Kaytron Allen, we've seen him bounce it out to the outside. Nothing's there in the middle. So I can't put all the blame on the wide receivers anymore, saying that the explosive plays are because of that. the interior of the offensive line is letting Penn State down offensively. Hunter Norzad's playing center for the first time in his career. Yes, I know he took some snaps there last season, but as far as live game consistent action, this is his first go-around. Played tackle at Cornell, played left guard last season for Penn State, and now he's the starting center for the first time playing football, period, right?
Mhm.
And then Vanga Ioane, JB Nelson cycling in and out. And I think they're great football players. I really do. I think they have all the potential in the world. But it allows me to look back at last season and say, okay, well, what's the biggest difference? Juice Scruggs was that much better than people gave him credit for. Because people assessed him, well, he's a 5th round, a 6th round pick. He's a fringe NFL roster player. And now he's starting for the Houston Texans. Okay. He was a guy that came into camp right away and showed flashes that they could trust him as a rookie. I know it's a young team, but that they could even play him right away when there were some injuries that opened up some opportunities for him. But now we look back at this Penn State roster, and Juice Scruggs made this offensive line that much better on the interior. So along with Parker Washington and Mitchell Tinsley, who have clearly proven to be better downfield blockers as wide receivers, with Juice Scruggs, I would say the interior of the offensive line isn't being as held accountable as they should be.
Yeah, I think that's been a big issue. I think you look at that interior, Hunter Norzad in there. They also lost Landon Tangwa, as everyone knows, retired right before the season started. That was a big loss. Last year was a big loss when he went down against Michigan before the game even started. So I think those two losses and Juice Scruggs, as you mentioned, just such big losses, and they just have struggled in the early going against teams that are really saying, we're going to put 7 guys, 8 guys in the box. We're going to try to make you throw it deep because we don't think your wide receiver talent can beat our corners. And they're trying to sell out to stop the run and stop those 2 running backs. And so far, the opposition has had success, limited to maybe a 4-yard game and not allowing those running backs to break loose and get those big plays that James Franklin wants from his running back position. I think you mentioned Penn State's been one of the best blocking wide receiver teams in the country for a while now. I think you look back when Saquon Barkley was here, those receivers were always blocking down the field.
Chris Godwin specifically.
Godwin was a great blocker down the field. Same with Miles Sanders and Journey Brown. When he was here, the guys were blocking down the field. They just haven't had that so far this season. And I'm sure that's something Coach Franklin and this offense with Mike Yurcik is going to look to fix. But it's definitely something that's a concern right now for Penn State, and they've got to get it fixed. They got a top 25 matchup against Iowa. Then they got Northwestern, bye week, UMass, and then, of course, the big matchup in Columbus against Ohio State. So, I mean, it's definitely something that Penn State has to address now and got to figure it out here, especially in these next 3 games, because when you go to Columbus, you're going to want to be able to rely on that run game, not put it all on your young quarterback and Drew Aller to try to beat a very good Ohio State team.
Yeah, because if they don't fix at least one of the things, whether it's finding a third, because I would say, right, establish the ground game or at least improve it. Penn State teams still have to respect, even though they've struggled a little bit or just haven't lived up to the standard. Let's say that, because they are averaging over 5 yards per carry, and that's the clip that you want. But as we have mentioned, the biggest run has come from Trey Potts in garbage time against Delaware. I'm glad that you brought that up. So Nicholas Singleton, Kaytron Allen, if you're going to want defenses to be a little more respectful of that, then you're going to have to fight up the middle. I've seen Kaytron Allen bounce too many runs to the outside when he is your between the tackles running back. That's just very uncharacteristic here. And thank goodness he has the vision to do that. So the tackles, Caden Wallace and Olu Fashanu, haven't been the problem. And let me give Illinois its due credit. They are very stout in the middle of the defense. Jerzon Newton, you saw him play. And then Randolph Jr., those 2 guys, the law firm, right? I want to bring it up again because it is clever, the law firm there. But Newton and Randolph are a very good interior duo for the defensive tackle spots, and they're going to be playing on Sundays too. So Penn State, I won't hold that so much against them. But when they struggled with the exact same thing against Delaware and then the exact same thing against West Virginia, and you got to say, okay, now it's becoming an issue because Ohio State and Michigan will make you pay for that. So if you can't run up the middle and get 6, 7, 8 yards on a play, then use the explosiveness to bounce to the outside. I mean, that's how you do finish 10-2, but I'm not saying that they can't fix it or that they won't fix it. I'm saying if you don't, then you are going to look at, unfortunately, a 10-2 season and back to the same spot that you were and not taking that next step forward.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing. But I think, as you said, I think this is a very fixable issue. I think Penn State's got the talent up front. The 2 running backs are maybe as good as it gets in the country when you look at just a duo that can bounce off each other. So I think it's definitely something that Coach Franklin and them are going to try to address. They keep mentioning they want to get those guys more touches, get them to that next level and get them explosive. So I think that's going to be a big key here against Iowa and then against Northwestern next week, trying to really hone in and try to get that explosive play from the running back position. But I think, I think all these things kind of to help each other out. I think if you get that third receiver, then defense have to respect the pass more. And if you get the tight ends more involved, they can't just know 2 tight end set. We're honing in to stop the run. We're not really worried about those tight ends leaking out. So I think all these things can help each other, and they just got to find a way to get 1 or 2 going, and then that would allow the third opportunity to open up for this team.
Let me add just one final thing here, and I want to carry the wide receivers over into our next segment because Iowa has a really good secondary, and I know we'll discuss some weather conditions too of how much passing there will be. But if Penn State is forced to pass, the Hawkeyes are very stout in the back end of the defense, and it is important to see if that next wide receiver will step up. And we don't know exactly the availability of Trey Wallace, but Penn State does need to get a little more creative on offense. I'm excited to see more of that 21 or 22 personnel where Singleton and Allen or Trey Potts, any one of those combination of the 3 of them, if you have 2 of them on the field at the same time to each hip of Drew Aller, I think that's going to be very exciting to watch. And I think that's stashed away. We've seen some of it at practice. We've seen some of it in games. The one big play from Singleton, fake to Allen, go to Singleton, and it led to that big gain against Illinois later on. And I think that's being saved for the Buckeyes and the Wolverines. But let's talk about the wide receivers, talk about Iowa coming up here in just a second. But first, let's hear from one of our sponsors of today's episode, and that is Bird Dogs. Bird Dogs make you look good. Simple as that. Bird Dogs stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you that truly sculpted look. Bird Dog shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but they fit way better. They fit way better than regular shorts that are just made of the stiff, restricting cotton. We get that. Bird Dogs fixed this issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki but stretches so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. Bird Dogs uses anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. I got a couple pairs of Bird Dog shorts myself, and they definitely live up to the billing. I got a couple, and then I got a couple more, and then I got a couple more after that. So believe me, go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege and get that free white tech hat with every order when you use promo code LockedOnCollege. That's birddogs.com/lockedoncollege for that free white tech hat. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you. And Locked On is amping up college football coverage. We've already seen it, but Locked On College Football Kickoff live every Friday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Time to talk all the latest college football playoff implications, preview that week's slate of games, and there's an exciting one for this week. So check it out, Locked On College Football Kickoff live Fridays, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Time on any of the Locked On College YouTube channels. Okay, Adam, let's pick it back up with the wide receivers because Penn State is, if they are going to pass it all, they're going to be very stingy, and they're going to make it difficult if Penn State needs to throw the football at any point in time, whether that's by design or because they got to pull something out of the playbook. If that third wide receiver, I still, from the original early season projections, and I said that they were going to use more 12 personnel. They were going to run more 2 tight end sets because you have the talent there. You can't keep Theo Johnson and Tyler Warren off the field separately. You want them both on the field at the same time. But I'm still waiting for Dante Cephas to kind of step up, whether that's as the X or the Z. I'm thinking now, I used to project Dante Cephas as the Z, as the X, but now I'm thinking he's going to be more the Z. You move Trey Wallace to the X if he's healthy enough, right? We don't know his availability. And then KeAndre Lambert-Smith back into the middle as the slot, as the wide receiver. Then you really got a good setup there. And then Liam Clifford can come in selectively as the slot because we've seen him perform very well when he's been asked to. Caden Saunders behind him. Malik McClain, some drops against Illinois, but a good game against West Virginia. So, week by week basis, let's evaluate here. But what ultimately is Penn State really missing at wide receiver? Do they just need more guys that can come in at the X and the Z and they're still going to run more 2 tight end sets? Or do we want to see them break out into 3 wide receiver, 4 wide receiver sets and really take advantage of the talent that James Franklin has said is there, but they're just not doing enough?
I think they got to find a way to get 3 receivers out there because I think that's been the problem with the explosive play. I think now you look with the 2 tight ends, you're not really worried about the vertical pass game. You can really focus, KeAndre Lambert-Smith's going deep. Trey Wallace, if he's out there, is probably going somewhere in the intermediate. And then you got your 2 tight ends working inside on the pass game. So teams are able to really hone in and not really worried about getting beat deep. I think you need to find a way to get guys, whether that's Caden Saunders, Dante Cephas. Haven't seen a lot of Amari Evans yet, but those type of guys who can take the top off the defense in the slot and really make some interesting things on the inside. I think that just opens up the offense when you got a guy like Drew Aller, who's got such a big arm and the ability to take the top off the defense, something Penn State's been looking for from their quarterback position. They need to find a way to make that work. And I think that's where it really starts, on the explosive plays. And if you're going to run 2 tight end set, which is something that Penn State's done historically, they've done a lot with Mike Yurcik over the last few years, you got to find a way to get them more involved in the passing game, find them open. Theo Johnson and Drew Aller just have not been on the same page so far this year. Tyler Warren's come on a little bit in the last 2 games, but they were non-existent against West Virginia. So you need to find a way, if you're going to play 2 tight ends, to get them more involved and try to open up this pass game. Because right now, teams understand Penn State's not going more than 20 yards down the field, and they can be really lenient with that.
Yeah, and for Penn State, I don't think that Iowa needs. So this is kind of the transition point into the Hawkeyes matchup itself, because I don't think Penn State is going to break out the 3 wide receiver sets, or they're going to try to really force it, because Iowa's got a good secondary. They got a great secondary, honestly. I know they've had some changes, but still, that Hawkeye secondary plays a lot of zone, and Penn State doesn't need to attack them that way. This is going to be the whiteout. Unfortunately, might end up being a dreary day. There's 90% as of right now at this point, right? This episode is up on Wednesday, September 20th. So hopefully Mother Nature changes her mind. But at least for this point, it's supposed to rain all day. It's going to be a soggy type of game. I don't know how much it's supposed to rain after kickoff, but I know throughout the day, people are tailgating in the afternoon. There's a 90% chance of rain, meaning that 90% of the area of State College is going to be covered with rain. It's not going to be necessarily heavy, but I would say steady. And I just hope that changes from this point, Adam. With that being said, teams don't typically throw in that kind of weather. So we're still going to see more of the same song and dance. Penn State's going to run 12 personnel, 2 tight end sets. They probably we are going to see maybe some of that 21, 22 personnel where Singleton and Allen are on the field at the same time, because Penn State's going to have to be committed to the running game. And unfortunately for Iowa, they are going to have to as well. But this conversation started, and let's finish it with the Penn State offense here. What are you anticipating from Penn State? Is it anything different from that, or just more status quo?
I think, they've got to find a way to get the explosive game without, risking the opportunity of turnovers. You mentioned the weather is definitely going to be a factor in this game. You're going to want to be able to run the ball, control that clock. It's kind of, on paper, think like, oh, you're playing into Iowa's hands, because that's how they're going to want you to play. But, you got to be careful. And you have the running backs, and you believe you have the offensive line that can play that style and win games. That's something James Franklin's been saying. We can do this now that we have not been able to do before. But you got to be able to find ways to at least threaten them. I know, we're talking about rain and night game against Iowa. In 2009, it was a very similar aspect. In the first play of the game, Penn State's offense in that game decided to go deep, and Darryl Clark hit Chaz Powell for an 80-yard touchdown. So maybe you try to catch them on their heels, like, Penn State's going to run the ball because of the weather. Maybe try to hit them deep a couple of times. Just keep the defense honest and guessing. You don't want to be too predictable. You don't want to turn the ball over. You want to be able to run it. But Penn State, they've got to be able to mix in that deep pass game and find a way to get guys out in space instead of just trying to focus on that run. Just be in balance. I think that's the big thing James Franklin preaches every week, and they're going to want to do.
Well, Iowa didn't exactly receive some good news, and it was confirmed at this point today, going into today, yesterday, Tuesday, September 19th. Confirmation that both the first string and second string running backs are out for the Iowa Hawkeyes, and then losing arguably their best player on offense, Lachey, the starting tight end number 1, wide receiver number 1. Iowa's still very good at cranking out tight end prospects to go into the NFL. TJ Hawkinson just became the highest paid tight end. So, like I said, due credit. I know the Hawkeyes have kind of become at least annoying to Penn State fans. There's been the trash talk all week about the faking injuries and everything like that. And I got a feel for someone, like reading the background stories about Lachey specifically. Just, he is a very down-to-earth human being. But in the case of football, when it comes to X's and O's, Iowa's going to be without 40% of its offensive production, Adam. And a team that already struggles with a Brian Ferentz-led offense, it's not going to be good going up against a feisty Nittany Lions defense. Like, I got to think. I'll say this now. Maybe I wanted to save it for the official game preview, Adam, but I'm really thinking that Penn State could force a goose egg from the Hawkeyes here. Iowa does not score a single point in this game. This really could shape up that way, where Penn State just controls everything from a defensive standpoint again in back-to-back weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I would not be shocked if that's the case. I think you look at the way the defense played against Illinois last week, forcing 5 turnovers, and you're going to tell them the weather's going to be in the favor of the defense. I think that's going to be a big thing. You're missing 2 of
Yeah.
your star running backs for Iowa. You might struggle to run the ball if Penn State can hone in and make
Yeah.
Cade McNamara beat them without Lachey out there. Still has Eric All and that connection they have
Yeah.
over from Michigan, but, just making the passing game beat you. I think that's what Penn State's going to want to do. Stop that run, because everyone knows that's what Iowa's coming to do. They're going to come and they're going to try to run the ball, work that clock, play keep away from Penn State, try to force turnovers, play their brand of football. And they've been good at that in the past, but that's something Penn State, you just got to hone in, try to play a defense. Manny Diaz is going to have a great game plan ready for this game. They've got the talent, and I would not be shocked if, as you said, Penn State, there's definitely an opportunity, and they have the ability to pitch a shutout this week, and the crowd's going to be on their side. I mean, Iowa's not going to face a crowd like this at all the entire season, so it's going to be a big game for Penn State, and they're going to be locked in, ready to go, and this defense could really carry the day just like it did a week ago.
Revenge on the mind as well. And Cade McNamara, he's prone to turnovers, seeing at Michigan and Iowa. He doesn't have that explosive playability, both with his arms or his legs. He's not a statue, but he's not mobile. I just think that if the weather's a factor and you're missing your top target, yes, Eric All is still in the mix, but you basically bracket him, sell out for the run, and no disrespect to LaShawn Williams, but for Williams, good, solid number 3 running back, but let me just bring up another statistic again. Has 164 yards in the ground. He's averaging 12 yards per carry. All that sounds great, right? Well, 145 of them came against Western Michigan last week. So up until that point, against the MAC opponent, he only had 19 rushing yards. So I think Penn State, if they're able to put 8, 9 in the box even, bracket Eric All, those, and especially with man coverage on the outside and the way the secondary's been playing, those wide receivers for Iowa are not good enough to break away on their own. They're going to have to get creative and find a way. It's a recipe for disaster for Iowa's offense. I could see something in the neighborhood of 5, 6 sacks. I could see multiple turnovers and maybe even a scoop and score, probably because if it's going to be raining, a fumble and a scoop and score, or even a pick 6. I mean, Penn State's defense is going to have another field day with the opponent. Now, Adam, we've covered a lot here with what Penn State's offense can do, what they're going to do, and the defense and how they're going to play against Iowa. But men's basketball, we are actually that close. I mean, November's not too far away. We still got some weeks left, but the basketball schedule is out. Thoughts and takeaways on that in just a moment. But first, let's hear from our other sponsor of today's episode, and that is Jase Medical. Everyone should be empowered to take care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. That's why Jase Medical offers the Jase Case. The Jase Case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use and gives you peace of mind so that you're not just hoping that you have access to medication in an emergency. Jase Medical makes sure that you have medication in hand. Jase Medical is simple. They handle everything from the online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. Don't get caught unprepared. Save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with the Jase Medical Plus, an additional $20 off by using code LOCKEDON at checkout at jasemedical.com. That is JASE medical.com, promo code LOCKED ON. Locked On Nittany Lions is your go-to podcast for Happy Valley Insider, Penn State rivals. You can check them out for all the latest as far as analysis coming off of the Illinois game and previewing Iowa and recapping it all, and men's basketball coverage too as well. Wrestling will be around the corner, men's hockey. It's all at Penn State Rivals. Adam, where can people keep up with your work and what you do?
At Sheetz Adam on Twitter. You can find everything. Also, Com Radio Sports right there, where we'll get all the work Com Radio does covering all Penn State sports.
All right, perfect. And of course, become an everyday here. Subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. Let us know in the comments what you think about the Iowa matchup and the men's basketball schedule release. So the full schedule is out. It's not just the non-conference or the Big Ten schedule. The whole slate is there. You can see it up on Penn State's athletic website, gopsusports.com. And this is a schedule that I particularly find very interesting between the ESPN Invitational. It's called the ESPN Events Invitational. It's kind of awkward because of the whole Big Ten, Fox, NBC, everything, right, with the TV deals, and they're playing on Penn State's going to be playing on ESPN, even though they're a Big Ten school, right? And then they finish up with Maryland again. They got Michigan in the Palestra game. I'm glad that Coach Mike Rhoades is continuing that as well, Adam. So, but the Big Ten my takeaway from this overall, Adam, is that the Big Ten Conference, it's going to be a dogfight. Like there are a lot of good teams in the Big Ten this year when it comes to men's basketball. So it's not that Penn State, they've gone through a lot of changes. Micah Shrewsbury had a good thing going, ends up going back to Notre Dame. We know the reasons. I'm not here to debate that with you. We have debated that actually. I'm going to link those episodes just for anybody that did miss it, because it was an interesting discussion at the time. But now moving forward with Coach Mike Rhoades, I think this team is good, but the level of competition just might be a little too much to handle.
Yeah, I liked what I saw when they went down to the Bahamas. It's the first time we really got to see these guys play. I thought there were a lot of good things you could take away, but you mentioned the Big Ten is just loaded this year. I think they have the best team in the country in Michigan State. I think that's how good Michigan State's going to be this year. Purdue's got Zach Edey back. They're going to be a tough team to beat in the Big Ten, and it's the Big Ten. So, you going on the road and winning is virtually impossible, and you got to find ways to win, which means it's just going to be so important for Penn State to protect their home court. You mentioned they get Michigan in the Palestra. They get Ohio State early, which is going to be huge. And I think the most important stretch of the season is going to be that non-conference schedule, which I think, to note, every non-conference game outside of the ESPN Invitational is at home. And they're not playing many big teams in their non-conference schedule, which, hurts the strength of schedule if we're thinking into March and resume. But you play in the Big Ten, you're going to find key wins there. But it's just going to be Penn State's ability to protect home court, win those non-conference games they're supposed to win, and be able to learn a lot about themselves. They're going to be throwing a lot of guys in there early. They're going to have a weird rotation. Everyone's going to be looking around like, well, who's playing, who's not. By January, I'm sure Coach Rhoades will be able to find out what his true guys that he trusts on this team are. But it's going to be very interesting to see. I mean, Penn State's one of the teams you look at, you're like, you just don't know what exactly they're going to be, just because you don't know how these guys are really going to mesh during the season through the, ups and downs that a season can bring. So I'm really excited to see. I think you mentioned the schedule kind of favorable, but just the way the Big Ten Conference is, it's never going to be easy. It's going to be so hard. You get Maryland in December on the road, and then Ohio State are your first two games, which are not going to be easy. So it's just going to be such a tough conference schedule, and that's where Penn State's going to have to try to pull off some upsets if they're thinking about postseason play in March.
Well, especially this stretch for January, Adam, at Michigan State. And that stinks because you have to play the Spartans twice in this season, when I think they can contend for the national title. I really do. They are top three, probably the best team in the country to go along Tom Izzo. Then you have the Palestra game, which is still a Juwan Howard-led Michigan team. And I know they go through a lot of changes every season because they bring in freshmen, they bring in transfers, but still Juwan Howard is able to attract very good talent. Then you got a Northwestern team that is probably not going to live up to the expectations they had from last season, but still a competitive, feisty, gritty team. Then you're on the road at Purdue. Then you have Wisconsin, who had a lot of young players. They're going to get better at Ohio State. And then you kind of get a little bit of a break with Minnesota, but that stretch in January is not a good one. Penn State could potentially lose 6 in a row at that given point unless they're able to somehow break it up.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing. That's where you look at Penn State and just the strength of the Big Ten. Penn State could play really good basketball and lose 6 games in a row. And that's just how crazy it is. They could be playing really well and just not find ways to win those games because of how good the other teams are. That's where, the Palestra game, that's one you got to circle if you're Mike Rhoades. That's a must win. It's going to be your best atmosphere you're going to have all season with Michigan coming to the Palestra. You got to find a way to win that game. You got to find a way to beat Northwestern. I mean, they're a gritty team. They're well coached. Chris Collins does a great job with that team, but you got to find a way to win that game. Minnesota out of that stretch, must win game. Maybe you can pull off
at home too.
At home, huge game for them. Maybe you can pull off an upset against Wisconsin. I mean, it's going to be Wisconsin. They don't blow anyone out, so it's going to be a close game. And if you can make some shots down the stretch, that's going to be huge. But there's just a lot of toss-up games where they're going to be close. It's kind of the story of Penn State every year. They're always in close games because they play up to their competition. They're that team no one wants to see, and they're going to play a lot of close games. But can this group of new cast at Penn State find ways to win those close games like the team last year did towards the end, which propelled them to the NCAA tournament?
Well, and that's just it, because January is supposed to be kind of the turning point for any new team that meshes together. And Penn State is a brand new team. They have a lot of guys that come from different backgrounds just in general when it comes to college basketball. So the biggest question for Penn State is, can they gel between new coach, new players with the different styles, whether it's different coaching, different play styles, and you have to be able to blend that all together. And January, they're going to be put into the blender while they're trying to blend their own circumstances and their styles. and it's not going to be forgiving. So I think that turning point for them, just like Micah Shrewsbury's team from a season ago, is February, and that's really what's going to make or break it. The Big Ten is going to get 10 teams into the NCAA tournament again. Can Penn State sneak in as that 9th or 10th team? It'll remain to be seen.
Yeah, I think, it all comes to, as we said, Penn State, they're going to be behind the 8 ball a little bit because of the strength of schedule. You hope you beat Texas A&M at the ESPN Invitation, and then that gets you a game against FAU, who's a top 5 team in the country. And if you can win there, then you got that huge resume boosting win that you can take with you all the way throughout the season. But, the Big Ten, it's a blessing and a curse. You're playing a tough game every single night, which hurts, but then it's also an opportunity to boost that resume every single night you walk on the court. But as you said, January and February, it's going to be where Mike Rhoades is able to – it's going to be where we see how good of a coach he really is. Can he keep this team together? Because there's going to be some losses. There's going to be some heartbreaking losses, tough losses that you say, hey, stay the course. We got another game coming up, because that's the big thing in the Big Ten. And I think the one huge thing is you always get a week's rest somewhere in the Big Ten. Like Penn State kind of struck out. Their week rest is the last week of the year they play, and then they get a week before they play Maryland in the last game of the year. So that's kind of where now you got the usual 3 games a week for Penn State this year, instead of getting that week's rest maybe in January or February, where it just kind of breaks it up. They get to breathe a little, practice, kind of right those wrongs. They don't get that now until the end of the year, which I think is a huge hole in that schedule and going to make it much harder on this team. But we mentioned they're new guys, but they're also veterans. They've been around the block. Puff Johnson obviously has played in a national championship game. He's been on a team that was preseason ranked number 1 last year, didn't live up to those expectations, but he has that ability to really bring the group together. Ace Baldwin's been a vocal leader in the VCU locker room, knows Mike Rhoades very well. So they've got these veteran guys that I think have the ability to keep this team together. It's going to be a matter of them doing that, especially after some tough losses early, which always come with Big Ten play, no matter how good you are.
And I know Steve Jones, the voice of Penn State men's basketball, will appreciate us bringing this up too. This is kind of the last impression from the schedule, but more Saturday home games for Penn State. Not while the students are on Christmas break. Not anything ridiculous they have the Sunday home games. It doesn't matter. Penn State does have a handful of Saturday home games where the fans, people who are off work, can be in attendance at the Bryce Jordan Center.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he's real happy. Maybe they have as many as Indiana this year. That's always the team he brings up when he talks about it. But that's huge, I think, because that brings the atmosphere to the Bryce Jordan Center, which you need. I mean, it's hard to say, but the Bryce Jordan Center has been one of the worst atmospheres in the Big Ten. And that's nothing. I mean, the Bryce Jordan Center hasn't been there, but it's also a compliment to all the other atmospheres they have to go into and play. It's a really tough conference to go on the road in, but it just brings the atmosphere there. Everyone gets involved in it. The Legion of Blue's been great so far. They moved them behind the bench last year. They'll be there again this year in year 2. They've been able to fill it, get behind the baskets, but I mean, you need that atmosphere, because that's that difference that Penn State has lacked. That's where you look at these close games and them not pulling out. Sometimes it is just, teams play well at the Bryce Jordan Center against Penn State. And I mean, that's just a tough way to live. It's like the old saying of, everyone always has a good day when they're playing Penn State. Random guy steps up. Keisai Tominaga last year at Nebraska went nuts against Penn State. So I think that's going to be the big question. Can Penn State get the atmosphere they need on those Saturday home games, win those Saturday home games? And that's where you look at the resume standings in the Big Ten, find your way, hopefully not have to play on Wednesday in Minneapolis in the Big Ten tournament, get that first round bye. And it's just so huge. So I think that's going to be the big thing. That Saturday home games are huge. I know we joke Steve is always really serious about that. He wants them, but it definitely does make a difference.
They do open up Big Ten play on the road. So don't bring up that one. We'll save that conversation for later. We gotta win here. So Adam, it's always great to have you back on the show. He is Adam Sheetz. Adam, thanks for the time. Thanks for the perspective, the insight, especially about men's basketball, and can't wait to have you back on the show to discuss just that, football and more next time. Appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks, Zach. Always a pleasure.
Hey, thanks so much for checking out this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Become an everydayer. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. Leave us feedback, leave a review, comment what you think about Penn State versus Iowa and what Penn State needs to do offensively to get ready for these better opponents down the stretch of the schedule. We'll have more Penn State football content on the way here on Locked On Nittany Lions.